Welcome to this week's edition of Mythology Cafe. So we're going to do, I was thinking since February kind of has love in the air, starting with Imbolc to St. Valentine's feast day, there's just this kind of idea of like, it's time to get frisky and make some new life, plant the seeds, at least this hemisphere. Winter is ending, the first stirrings of spring are happening. And Imbolc has one of its translations is in the belly, the idea that the sheep, the ewes are with lambs, already. And it's going to be, several weeks later, the first lambs are going to be born of the season. So this idea that like things are stirring. Spring is stirring, and and then of course like our cultural obsession with like Valentine's Day. It's a time of love, right? But love is a funny word. I ages ago did kind of an investigation of like just the different amounts of ways one can express love, meaning I can say I love my shoes, and I can say, I love my parents, and I love my husband, I love my parrot, and I love my friends. And these are all drastically different emotions, but we're saying the same word all the time, right? So what, and in one way, when you repeat something so many times, it loses its meaning. And in another way, when it has kind of this cloud of interpretation, it is just so rich and full of meanings. There's poles there. That's just like, it can mean so many things. And then it can also kind of be devoid of meaning at the same time when it just gets hollowed out. So it's this funny word. It's just a funny concept. And I always wish that we had more language to express these different things. So I was thinking, instead of kind of focusing on a romantic love, potentially, as I think like Valentine's Day has a tendency to like lean into, I wanted to think about kind of love as a spiritual devotion to self, and love as a full commitment from your internal being to your external being. So it's self-love, but self-love in a full devotional sort of way. One of my favorite stories about Krishna is kind of like a two-part thing, because after digging in a little bit more, I found out more information about it that I didn't quite have fully baked out before. But it's Krishna and the Gopis, and then Radha and Krishna. And the love story between Radha and Krishna is really interesting. But the original story was Krishna and the Gopis. So let me give you some visual aids so you better know what I'm talking about here. Baby Krishna is on the left. He was, basically he's born into a village of cowherds. And instantly everyone's like, oh, this kid is special. He's got this beautiful blue skin, and everyone falls in love with him like instantly as a baby. And he's super naughty. And there's a ton of stories of him as a baby doing really like amazing things and also really naughty things. And, obviously cute as a button, but he grows up and becomes like lady killer, right? Like everyone, he plays the flute and he's just like long hair, gorgeous, dashing, and like everyone just adores him, and the ladies just can't have enough. And so he's doing his thing in the village, and everybody's daughter, everybody's wife is just head over heels. He grows up in this village. Everyone knows him. And I love this. These were already very much his victims when they heard one moonlit night the strains of a solitary flute coming from the forest, distant music drifting to their hearts. Their perfume of white water lilies hung heavy in the air. And all the gopis are the cowherds' wives. All the gopis all stirred in sleep. Their hearts opened, then their eyes, and one by one they got up and cautiously, and like so many shadows, slipped from their homes. So, you have to picture it like Krishna's out and about. It's this beautiful, like, full moon, and he starts playing his flute, and all the ladies are like, "What?" You know, they just wake up and they're just enraptured. And one by one, they sneak away from their husbands and their fathers, and they go out into the woods to try and find Krishna playing the flute because they know who it is. You know, it's not like, "Who's that? Who's playing the flute at this hour?" Oh no, they know. And so what happens next is something called in the story the Rasa Lila. Um, and so there's a whole slew of these stories, and they date back from the 6th century to the 17th century is a whole tradition of a variety of versions of the story. And Lila, is Lila still on here? Lila, yes, you are, there you are, means cosmic play. And we were talking earlier, it's just one of my favorite words on the planet, just because this notion of cosmic play and how the universe came into being from play, and that it continues to be born every moment from play, right? It's this ever creative, fertile, just joyous, just upwelling of fun and creativity and bliss, right? And so the Rasa Lila is this same mood of dance and play and joy, right? And so all these ladies are out in the middle of the woods. He's playing the flute, and they're all just like swooning, and there's this passage where all their bracelets and their charms are slightly like jingling in the night, and you can just hear that, like, the rustle of the silk of their saris, and you get the sense that we're dealing with this ultimate feminine creative power, right? Like, all these women are just in in the mood, and it's this joyous, sexy, by the moonlight, like he's playing the flute, it just sets the scene. And at some point, it kind of reaches this tipping point where they just can't take it anymore and they start to dance. So as he's playing the flute, all the women start to dance. In the earliest versions of these stories, it's very kind of like bucolic is the word. It's like really just sweet, and they're all like joining hands and they're all dancing in a circle, and it's lovely. It doesn't kind of get to be that. Anyway, so let me hold on. In the first versions of this, they're all just joining hands, they're dancing. It's very sweet. It's very innocent. Let me put it that way. It's very innocent. And then as kind of the centuries wean on, and kind of the Tantrism gets introduced into India. Well, I mean, it's invented in India, but it becomes more pervasive. This story in particular takes on slightly different meanings than it originally had. And so it becomes much more alive. And so when they're first just kind of dancing, holding hands, right, it turns into, they start having kind of an ecstatic dance moment. And as Krishna's playing the flute, every single one of these ladies, and I love this quote, "As she elephants covered with dust enjoy the frenzy of a great male, so those herding women, their limbs covered with dust and cow dung, crushed about Krishna and danced with him on all sides, their faces laughing and their eyes large and warm as those of dark antelopes grew bright as they drank ravenously the wonder of their dear friend. Aha," he would cry out and startle them, and they would quiver with delight. And their hair coming down, cascading over their bounded breasts as the young god thus among the Gopis played those nights beneath the autumn moon.
right? So it starts getting to be a little more risque, if you will, and that then eventually turns into like Krishna is the Lord of love. So he recognizes that each one of these women want him to themselves, right? And so what does he do? And that's what this painting is depicting. He multiplies himself so that every single one of these women gets to dance with Krishna. So it's everyone is fulfilled. They all get their not only their truest heart's desire, but they get to have a personal experience with his divinity, which I just love. This is like such an incredible just moment in kind of story and myth where you get to have him for yourself. Every single one of us gets to have him for ourselves, you know? And I think that that's such a beautiful image. It's not just this one remote thing you can't touch, but I get to have a personal dance, an erotic dance and play with the divine, right? Like amazing. And so, you know, this just gets into it's whipped up into a frenzy. And then suddenly he disappears. So everyone's dancing, everyone's having a wonderful time. And suddenly, like, all the Krishnas disappear. And everyone's like, what? You know? I mean, you know, like, it's kind of almost like in the story, it's like they're just about to all climax. And then suddenly he's gone, you know? And they're like, what's going on? So they're running around frenzied, and they notice his footsteps. And then they notice, like, the footsteps of a lady right next to him, and then suddenly the lady footsteps are gone and his become heavier, and they're like, oh my god, he's carrying her, you know? So they all get really upset for a second, and they're like, we just want him back, we love him so much. And then the story then diverges in a bunch of different ways, but essentially he comes back and he's like, that feeling of longing that you had for me in that moment, I want you to have that for me all the time. Like, that is such a pure devotional feeling. Like, that is the love, right? That is the love I want you to have, of like just full abandon, full openness, full longing, you know? It's this powerful stuff. And so it's just kind of mentioned at this point that he had kind of this favorite gopi that he kind of went off with for a little while, and then he came back. And that's kind of it in the story until much later. Kind of more later, again, when like, so I'm not going to really define Tantrism, but I'm just going to say here that Tantric practice is what I like to think of it as kind of a mystical union with the divine. It's very similar in Buddhist practice, where it's called Vajrayana, because it was adopted from kind of Hinduism in a way. And so Tantrism has this full-on experiential abandon of what it is to commune and become one with divinity. And so in India, the Shiva Shakti principle became a driving force of Tantrism. So Shiva is the male god, and Shakti is the female principle. So Shakti and the female goddess, right? So the male gods always needed a female consort, but a lover, right? So it's the idea, they call it yabhyam, and it's the image often you see on in paintings. It's kind of in the anyway. So it's the image where it's like the male god is sitting and the female god is sitting on top of him, and they're making love, right? So that's this idea that the world is eternally being created by the male and the female principle. And it has, I think, it very much to do with kind of this idea of cosmic play, right? Where there's this constant mode and moment of creation that's happening all the time. So, of course, Krishna needed a lady aspect, right? So they went into the story of him and the gopis, and were like, he had a favorite gopi, right? And so her name became Radha. And so much so, they're so much connected, like Shiva Shakti, you know, we think of kind of as like a duality of, you know, one and the same, Radha Krishna. is, thought of as the same person. There's Radha. So the story of Radha is that Krishna, as a little child, was being naughty as usual, and they were like, he needs to go home. Radha, who was slightly older and already married, Radha, can you take him home? And she was like, sure, sure, and they're like, instead of taking him home, she took him to love. And that just means that she just fell madly in love with him. Like, even as a child, like they had this like amazing connection. And there's several versions of the story where either he leaves and then she gets married, or she's already married, and it just becomes this kind of uh, uh, it's a love affair that never, well, in certain versions of the story, it's a love affair that never gets consummated, and it becomes this, his female principal is a love that is a love of friendship and a true love of uh, not only of the divinity, but kind of the exterior, where Radha is the interior and Krishna is the exterior. And then, of course, in other versions of the story, they definitely do make love. This has a huge, long tradition. So we're talking hundreds and hundreds of years of this developing. And when we get to this place of the two of them, the love between the two of them being not just consummated, but we're looking at love here in a different way. So it's hard, I think, in many ways for kind of our Western way of thinking to accept a sex as religious and love the Lord Krishna as the Lord of love, where he not only danced with every single one of those gopis, but he also made love with every single one of those gopis. And there was so much commotion going on that all the gods and goddesses from the realms came to watch, because they were like, my God, what's going on? And the goddesses were like fainting left and right, but they were like taking notes, and some of them incarnated as human beings to like try some of that stuff out, so there's this idea, and it's like, that is just not the Christian tradition. You know what I mean? There's just, I mean, even that's not entirely true, because there's that weird corner of Christianity where you have kind of orgasms with God, right? But that's a very small sub corner that like no one likes to talk about on some level. So we have it, but it's just not as well developed in the West as obviously it is here. So, okay, so we're going to go back into the story where Krishna has now danced with all the ladies, and he kind of disappears for a second, right? And so he has departed from the gopis, and having searched the wood for Radha, sits alone and sings in a thicket of bamboo beside the Jumna, which is a river. Alas, she is gone, for I let her go. What good to me now are friends or life? I can see her brow angry and offended, yet I hold her in my heart. But if I can hold her in my thoughts this way, can she be really gone? Radha's servant girl comes to Krishna and sings to him of the yearning of his mistress. For the pleasure of your embrace, she has prepared a flowery bed. How is she to live without you? Come, for she is sick with love. Tell her, said he, that I am here. And the girl returned to Radha with a song of urging without shame. He has tuned the tones of his flute to your name. Oh, go to him in desire, on a couch of tender branches, letting part of your robe and girdle offer to him the luxury of your hips with the rich treasure between of their sweet receptacle of delight. He is impatient, watching everywhere for your appearance. It is time. But the woman, ravished by love, was too weak to move. The servant girl returned, therefore, to Krishna. And may this she waits amid flowers, lives only in dreams of your love, wonders why you hesitate, and is kissing mirages, weeping there alone. Every leaf that falls, she thinks may be you, and smooths the bed. Why then do you tarry here? I mean, she is like hot and bothered, The moon rose, but no Krishna came, and Radha alone lamented. The hour has come and gone, she sighed. Alas, I am erased from his heart. Another female has enmeshed him. The ornaments of her girdle chatter as she walks, alluring, rocking with her haunches, they murmur of delight. Alas, I can see him lovingly pasting pearls around her neck, already branded by his nails. The lover sheepishly came, so he finally shows up. And though he bowed before her feet, he, the incarnation of the Lord who lives in all beings. So they're making a point here that like, this is God, right? This is God bowing before his human lover. So, I mean, that's an image. The earthly woman tortured him in a rage. Those heavy eyes from weeping, it is not rather from a night of luxurious access. Go, disappear, follow the traces of one who has brought you to this fatigue. She's like, you were just making out with someone, weren't you? Like, get out of here. Your teeth are black with makeup of her eyes. What? Your body marked with her nails is the document of her victory. The imprint of her teeth on your lip pains my thoughts. Oh, your soul is even blacker than your body. You roam the forest only to eat up girls. So she's pissed. And so like the servant girl's like, oh, Radha, your beautiful lover has come. What greater pleasure is there on earth? Why do you render useless the bounty of your breasts, heavier than coconuts, to be called with exquisite delight? Do not despise this delicious youth. Do not weep. Look at him, love him, eat him. And then, okay, Radha's like, all right, okay, fine, you're right. Like, I'm just upset. And Radha showed a gentler face. And Krishna, in the gathering dusk, spoke to her amid sighs and tears. The luster of your teeth, bright as the moon, scatters the darkness of my fear. The fire of desire burns in my soul. Let me quench it in the honey of your lips. If you are angry, stab with your eyes, chain me with your arms, and rip me to tatters with your teeth. You are the pearl in the ocean of my being. You are the woman of my heart. Put away your fear of me, who inspired it. There is no power in my heart but love. He moved away from her towards the flower couch she had made, and one of the gopis present advised her. So there's this other lady that's been standing there this whole time, apparently. Dear, you are now to become his slayer. Approach him with a slightly indolent walk, anklets langorously clashing, to let him know that your mood is now of sweetness. Bring to him those thighs, round as the trunks of elephants, letting your bosom be your guide, which now is yearning openly for his lips. Glorious, lovely woman, your majestic body is well equipped for this approaching night of war. March on to the drumbeat of your jeweled rocking belt, and having let the clank of your bracelets proclaim the pending attack, fall with sharp nails upon his breast. He waits, trembling, sweating there with joy. Embrace him fully in the dark of this perfect night. Radha blushed, but the girl urged her on. How can you be afraid of one whom you can buy as your slave for a pittance of joy rendered as readily as a wink? And the woman shining like, I love this, and the woman shining like the disk of the moon arose in fear and delight to move with anklets clanging towards the bower, and the gopis who were there departed, covering their mouths to hide smiles, for she had already thrown off all shame. You get where this is going, right? Let me get to the juicy bits. Just as a reminder, this is like spiritual, religious, devotional poetry that I'm reading, right? Again, like such a different mood of this is a full abandon, a full love making with the divine. And it's hard because it's just like I'm just reading like softcore porn right now, but this is like, it's religious. So, again, just hold that in your mind. She made him captive with a sudden encirclement of arms, routed him with her bosom, mangled him with her nails, and tore at his lower lip with her teeth, pummeled him with her haunches, dragged his head back by his hair, and then drowned him with the honey mead of her throat. When her eyes closed and her breath began to come harder, however, the force of her arms relaxed, and the great hip zone grew still. The god then moved against the field, and then morning dawned. With the woman's divine lover beheld beneath him, Was her chest lacerated by the army of her nails, her eyes afire for lack of sleep, the color of her lips destroyed, her mashed garland tangled in her shattered hair, and her clothes dislodged from the jeweled girdle. The sight, like a volley of love's arrows, overwhelmed him. And, O reader, may that God be your protection who spread aside Radha's garment to gaze with ravished eyes upon the tumid pinnacles of her breast, while he sought to amuse her with a text from the Purana. When the gods and demons churned the milky ocean, he said, for the butter of immortality, they churned for 1,000 years. And there appeared first such a poisonous smoke that the operations had to cease until our greatest yogi, Shiva, took the poison into a cup and drank it off, which he held by yoga in his throat. You know, I've wondered why he did it. The poison turned his throat blue, so that they call him blue throat. But I think now that he drank because he knew, my dear, that when you came into being on the shore of the great milky sea, that you would choose for your love, not him, but me. And Radha, languorously happy, became gradually aware of the disorder of her person. Hair in disarray, sweat on her face, cuts on her breast, and her belt where it should not have been. Mortified, she started up with her mashed garland, and with one arm shielding her breasts and the other her groin, made off. When she returned, fatigued in all her members, with delight and admiration, she begged her lover to help her repair her dress. She was like, can you help? I'm a disaster right now. Can you help me like put my shit together? I mean, it's so human, right? I love how wonderfully just raw and human that is. Krishna, my dear one, freshen with your beloved hand the sandal powder of my chest. Now the makeup on my eyes, here are my earrings. Next, do it prettily, these flowers on my hair. Can you just help me like fix that, please? Like I look terrible, you know? She says, now enclose my breasts, put that ring back on my arms. And her beloved did as she told him, though indeed he was God himself. And it goes on, but that's essentially like, so they have this wild night. They have this wild, crazy lovemaking that is pure, that is sacred, that is divine. And this is why, so there's this idea that in any of these kind of like female male divinity couples, if you will, your heart or your soul needs to love and be devoted to the God like your, you know, like Radha, you know, like your soul should be the Radha and your body should be the Krishna. So they become one, you know, and that's this wonderful flip of kind of what Tantrism does. It's like, okay, here's this duality, but within this duality, there's a singularity, there's a oneness, right? And it's that mystery of the one and the two. And then, of course, the full dissolution, which is the nothing, that, you know, is what thousands of years of meditation practice and stuff is all about. So I love this image of the two of them together as kind of one being, right? And this is kind of the idea, you know, that the story, not only from the beginning where Krishna multiplies himself to give every single one of those women that are madly in love with him a personal experience that's just their own of himself. He also helps Radha like get dressed in the morning. You know, he's like, let me help you with your armbands. Here's your, you know, here, let me help you with the flowers in your hair and like, you know, fix all this stuff. Let's put your pearls back on. Like, honey, here's your eye makeup. You know, I mean, like, what a active, that's the God doing that to a human. So there's this incredible devotion from the God back to the soul, you know, back to, so from the body back to the soul in this way of thinking about it. So it goes both ways, you know, and I think and a lot of, many of the kind of Hindu mystics were described as, there was one in particular that was described as his, inside was Radha and his outside was Krishna. So that's kind of that's the goal. That's the idea of how you think about these elements. And in this rather saucy, wonderful story, we get this whole other way of looking at what soul love can be like, and that ultimate abandon, that ultimate union is that kind of orgasmic way of letting go and being fully enraptured in love can be something that you can have internally for yourself and through you into the divine, right? Like, this is the connection. And then that divinity can have that love back to you, and it is a deeply personal connection, that's highly erotic in one way. And we just, other than kind of like the joke of like I think, that's why I wanted to talk about Tantrism just for a smidgen, because like, I think most people think of Tantra and they're just like, oh, the Kama Sutra. It's like way more than that. That is some tiny sliver of anything related to anything. It's this idea of, you can have this love, you can have this highly profoundly open, abandoned, erotic love with the divine, through yourself, with yourself, and that divine can have that love back to you. So I would like us to think of, I think, and again, I think, self-love is kind of one of those things that like we say a lot. I mean, you just scroll through Instagram and there's like a fuck ton of like self-love tips, which is fine. It's great that, all of these things are great, but this is not the kind of self-love we're talking about. I think they're thinking like, let's give ourselves hugs and like, like love ourselves, almost like there's this like parental love that's like, you should be a good parent to yourself, which you should be. All of these things are true, right? Like, love yourself, like love your inner child, heal your wounds. All of that is fine. But maybe there's room in there for love yourself like a lover, and that doesn't mean just like touching yourself and whatever, but like, which is also great, do that too. But like, love yourself in this way that you are enraptured with the greater possibilities of being. And that's what I love this story, and I love this series of stories, because it points to that place where then you become like this image, you become this a full being, right? A full moment of divine and human and divine coming together in this way of fullness.